this mining number that came out, 29%, was that as you expected?
It was actually slightly better than expectations. I think people were looking for a year-on-year decline of around 35% to 40%. So minus 29.5% was actually slightly better than anticipated.
All right. So I guess when we look at sort of glass half full and glass half empty, compared to April, it really was a good improvement.
Compared to April, it was a good improvement, but it was expected to show an improvement because one needs to recall the first 2 weeks of April, the mining sector was completely shut down. Then the government in the second 2 weeks of the lockdown, level 5, allowed 30% of mining to be back in operation. Throughout this period, coal mining was largely allowed because it was necessary for the electricity supply industry. And then in May, they opened it up to about 50% of the sector. So we had a gradual opening up of the mining sector between the middle of April through to through the course of May.
All right, so I suppose it's a good sign that things are starting to improve, but the story also is about demand, and so we can get our miners into the shafts, but the stuff we're digging out may not necessarily be sold.
That is true, especially at the time back in March, China was largely locked down long before everyone else was locked down, and that had an important role to play in minimizing the amount of minerals that we could actually export to China. But that wasn't so much the case any longer in April and May. I think it was more a case of the sector being shut down than not being able to sell product.
All right. So what might be concerns going forward for the sector?
Well, one of the concerns that we had, and even in June when we were supposed to have a complete return to the full mining production, is the fact that mining unions have been against the fact that the mining sector has been opened up, because they believe that the protocols on safety to protect the industry against the ravages of COVID-19 have not been sufficiently properly been put into place in the mining sector. And we saw a lot of miners actually contracting the infection through the course of June. And that may be a problem in terms of harmonious labor relations and the ability to keep producing that way.
And of course, we've started seeing load shedding happening once again, and mining without power is not a great picture.
Well, obviously, load shedding is a big factor. It's still too early to say that this will have had a huge impact yet on the mining sector, but at the margin, it will have depressed mining output in July, no question about that.
And the thing about mining is you can't recover that which you didn't get out the ground in a period of time. What does that mean in terms of, going forward, mining's contribution to the economy?
Unfortunately, mining's contribution to the economy has been declining steadily for the last 30 years, and there seems to be no end to that decline at the moment. And as a result of what we're seeing right now, I think there's going to be a continuation of that decline. Unfortunately, it was the cornerstone of the history of the South African economy, and yet it is a sector in decline. Instead, what we're seeing, and we still saw this in the GDP figures, is we're seeing positive growth in many of our services sectors, and that's not actually what the government wants. The government would like to see mining and manufacturing spearheading and recovery on the back of the reindustrialization of the South African economy. And instead, what we're seeing is sectors such as retail, trade, tourism, well, that's taken a knock more recently, transport and communication, government, financial services, they're the ones that are actually growing faster than the likes of mining and manufacturing.
How do we compare our mining sector with other parts of the world coming out of COVID-19?
Globally, of course, many countries have seen their mining sectors badly damaged by COVID. But I think in South Africa, we are getting out of the lockdown a little more slowly than has been the case in many other countries in the world. And that is largely because of the opposition to the opening up of the sector from the workers themselves.
All right, and we've spoke about demand, but what do you see going forward? Is there going to be a pickup in demand for our commodities, or is that going to take some time?
I think one has to expect some pickup in the demand for our economies if you believe that there's going to be some recovery in the global economy, which I think is the general expectation. But the global economy itself faces huge headwinds in future years. The one bright spark is the price of gold, which has been rising all this time on the back of fears that the governments have been pouring in so much liquidity into the world economy to resuscitate it that we could see inflation in the future. The tragedy here is that our gold mining sector has become a tiny portion of the mining sector as a whole. We used to be the biggest gold mining producer in the world. We are now the 10th most important gold mining producer in the world, and gold only accounts for some 16-17% of the total mining sector. So we can't, unfortunately, exploit that benefit to the extent that we would have liked to do.
All right, we've been talking about mining generally, but let's talk about the economy in its kind of global picture. And I just wonder, you know, when we were talking to you around about February, COVID-19 hadn't hit, but we were already describing the economy as an economy in crisis. And I just wonder, now with COVID in the picture, what does that mean about South Africa's economy going forward? Is this an opportunity to reset, or we're so far back behind the line now that it's going to take super efforts just to get to the start line?
Peter, you're absolutely correct. The economy was in dire straits even before COVID hit us. The only consolation we've got is that many other countries in the world have been hammered by COVID in the same way as we have. The problem is that we know very well that our economy was very weak even before COVID because of a series of structural weaknesses in the economy. And unless we actually address those, and that requires leadership from the top, we are really not going to see any long-lasting, strong recovery. And it may take up to 5 years to get back to where we were in 2019. That is, if we don't take advantage of the current opportunity to reset. And here, there are some initiatives being undertaken by National Treasury, Business for South Africa, and some other bodies, but there is strong opposition to the kind of actions that they are willing to take. So it's not quite clear whether we will grasp the nettle and restructure the economy the way we ought to restore a higher level of sustainable growth.
And restructuring SOEs must be a priority. And will that mean the kind of things we're seeing at SAA where job cuts are going to have to be a pain that we suffer?
Unfortunately, in the short term, job cuts are almost inevitable. Many have already taken place. You know, with SAA, we're talking about a few thousand jobs, whereas in the economy as a whole, we're talking 1 million or more jobs that have either been lost or are about to be lost. And there's a lot of pain to be taken. The biggest area, of course, where pain might have to be taken is in the public sector itself, which has been responsible for squeezing out the ability of the country as a whole to be able to supply, garner the resources to provide for growth. And a lot of that has also been linked to high levels of corruption. Unless we actually address those issues, we are going to struggle. And a lot of jobs are being lost precisely because of the corruption that we have seen over the last decade, which has left us without the resources to grow faster.